All right, guys, we're moving into the next section of the chapter. If you're following along in your textbook, it is section 4.2. And we're going to transition. We're going to go from what we were doing before, which is observational studies, and we're going to make the transition to experiments. An observational study is something where we ask questions, but we can ask about many different things, but we don't actually impose the treatments. In an experiment, we directly impose the treatments on individuals to measure their responses. What we do this, we need to make sure we understand what is the response variable and what is the explanatory variable. To tie that back to math, it was the x and the y. The explanatory variable is our x. It's what we're going to put in. And the response variable is our y. It's what we're going to get out. So we would do an experiment on something like, survivor rates of a surgery, and we'd give people different drugs. The different drugs would be our explanatory variable, and whether or not they survived the surgery would be the response variable. And that's an example of an experiment because we are actually doing different things to the different people. If we want to understand cause and effect, experiments are the only way to do that. You cannot establish cause and effect from an observational study. And we'll get into this next class, but there's a wonderful example of doctors noticing that they were doing routine tests on people, and they kept track of how much vitamin D someone had and how healthy they were. And what they found is that people who had higher levels of vitamin D were much healthier. They had much better fitness. They had much longer life, everything like that. And so all these doctors started prescribing vitamin D for their patients, and it had almost no effect. And the reason for that, and like I said, we're going to talk about this more in class in detail, is it wasn't that the people were healthier because they had more vitamin D. It's that the people who were healthy, people who got out and exercised, people who got outside, people who ate right, had higher levels of vitamin D in their system. So the vitamin D wasn't causing them to be healthy. They were healthy because they had more vitamin D. And so the only way we can establish cause and effect is to do an experiment. Take 20 people, give half of them vitamin D, half of them we don't give vitamin D, we give them some placebo, which we'll talk about in the next video, and see if there's a difference between the two groups. This distinction is really important, really important. So observational studies will often fail also because of what's known as a confounding variable. And they're going to use lurking, but we're going to stick with confounding. A confounding variable is a third thing that would cause something to be measurable. For example, if I did a study and I took all the kids who entered elementary school and I measured their weight, which is one variable, and I measured their reading score, another variable, what we would see is that kids who had way more would have a much higher reading score at the elementary school level. Well, that doesn't mean that their weight causes them to read better. In fact, what's going on there is that kids who are older in elementary school weigh more.
Coach Wortham, Mrs. Bryant needs you in the front office, please. Coach Wortham.
Is if kids are older, they weigh more. The sixth graders weigh more than the first graders. The sixth graders also read better than the first graders. And so there's not cause, it's the confounding variable of age, because age is linked with weight and age is linked with reading score, that causes the two of them to show a correlation. So the only way to do that, to establish cause and effect, once again, is to do an experiment. This is just further definition of lurking and confounding. Once again, we want to stay away from this. We want to use the word confounding. Lurking can be misused if you don't use it exactly right. Confounding is a more general thing, so anytime you think you would say lurking, just say confounding on the AP exam. Okay, so there's the basic definition of an experiment is we're going to take something, and that's going to be our experimental units. It could be people, it could be groups of people, it could be animals, it could be objects, it could be groups of objects, and we're going to impose some treatment on some of them. And we'll get into this later. Not on all of them, just on some of them, and then we're going to observe the response. So the condition that we apply to individuals is the treatment. The experimental units, and this is the thing, is the smallest collections of individuals to which treatments are applied. And this part, the smallest unit of individuals, is what really messes people up with experimental units. And we're going to look at this in a second. But this is really important. It's what is the smallest group that we're giving a treatment to and that we're measuring the response in. If our smallest individual are human beings, we call them subjects. So let's look at this. A cookie manufacturer is trying to determine how long cookies stay fresh on store shelves and the extent to which the type of packaging and the store's temperature influences how long the cookies stay fresh. He designs a completely randomized experiment involving low and high temperatures and two types of packaging, plastic and wax cardboard, lists the experimental units, the explanatory and response variables, and treatments in the experiment. Well, the easiest one to do are the treatments. The treatments are high.
Ms. Joseph, could you call the front office, please? Ms. Joseph?
High and low temperatures, and plastic and cardboard. Those are our treatments. Our explanatory variables are types of packaging, which are listed, and temperature of storage. So there's our explanatory variable. Our response variable is freshness. And I'm assuming they have some method to measure freshness. So then the last question is, what are the experimental units? What are the experimental units? What are we actually imposing experiments on? Well, most cookies don't come in packages of one. They come in packages of like 4 or 5. You get a roll of Oreos. Even the most 2 cookies, 3 cookies. And so the experimental unit is the package of cookies. It's not the individual cookie, because we're not doing the treatment to individual cookies. We're doing the treatments to different packages of cookies. And that's an important distinction. So, good design is essential. Good design is essential. So here's an example of bad design. A high school course regularly offers a review course to prepare students for the SAT. This year, budget cuts will allow the school to only offer an online version of the course. So over the past 10 years, the average SAT score of students in the classroom course was 1620. The online group gets an average of 1780. And that's roughly about 10% higher. So is the online course more effective? Well, this is an experiment because we actually did 2 different things. We had some kids who took the SAT class and some kids who took the SAT class in the classroom, and some of them who took it on the computer. The difference, though, is that we didn't randomly select them. They self-selected. And so if people self-select, the results are garbage. It could be that the kids in the in-class were assigned there by their guidance counselor, and the kids in the online were people who signed up on their own, and so they're more motivated students, and they have a higher GPA, and they're all AP kids who couldn't take the inline class because they didn't have time during their schedule. And so you don't know that that's what caused it. So when we design an experiment, there has to be a control, right? The only way to see if the SAT scores are actually higher was to take 30 students, and then say 30 students, we could whatever number, and then randomly assign 15 of them to one, to the in class, and randomly assign 15 to the online. And then only after we randomly selected them and assigned them, then we could measure the difference. And if there was a difference, then we can say one was better than the other. But unless we actually impose randomly the treatments, we cannot say that the two are different. When we randomly select, we don't guarantee, excuse me, interruption.
Dakota Glover, you are needed in the front office, please. Dakota Glover.
We're not defining, saying for sure that one of them causes the other. But if we randomize, sorry, Mrs. Wedge's 30th interruption confused me. If we randomize who gets it, then the confounding variables are more likely to cancel each other out. So those confounding variables are equally dispersed, and so the effects of one versus the other is the actual explanatory variable, which is the type of class. So it's really important. Most people who do experiments do it poorly because they don't deal with the confounding variables. So it's really, really important to have a control group, to have a group on which no treatment is done. Not just, so if we want to say that aspirin causes you to live long, we not only have to give aspirin to people, but we have to not give aspirin to some people and measure the difference. And we have to randomly select those people so we can make sure that there's no confounding variables. And this is what it's saying is, and this is just what I was saying, is that we have to compare different treatments. And so, and even if the groups that we're giving different treatments to are different, then we can't do the thing. And so there really has to be random assignment to these different groups. And that will greatly reduce the chance of confounding. If we can randomly assign, then we greatly reduce the confounding effects. So ideally what you have is you have some experimental units, and you randomly assign them to two different groups. And then one group gets one treatment, and one group gets the other treatment, and then we compare the difference between them. And because the two groups are more or less the same, the only difference being is that they receive the two different treatments, then we can say the treatments are what caused the difference in the results, and that it wasn't by random chance. And we're going to do some stuff with this in class, showing like how can we actually say that something happened by random chance, or what are the chances that this happened randomly, or it's the effect of the treatment. We're going to do that in class. So the key is to control for lurking variables. By using comparative design and random assignment, we can generally do that. The other big one is that it needs to be replication. We need to do enough of it. We can't just do, like if we wanted to prove that baby aspirin, once again, causes you to live longer, we couldn't give baby aspirin to one person and a placebo to a second person. We'd have to do it to lots and lots of people so that we saw the results often enough that it couldn't happen by random chance. So the three big things are control, random assignment, and replication. Here's an example. You can read this on page 241 of your book. But basically, they wanted to see if hey, I paused during that announcement, is to see if aspirin or beta carotene reduced the risk of heart attack, I think. Hold on, let me look at the book. Yep. And so what they did is they did a randomized study. They randomly assigned people to one of four groups. Some people got aspirin and beta carotene. Some people got placebo and beta carotene. Some people got aspirin and placebo, and some people got both placebos. So this group, we didn't actually impose a treatment on, but the people in the group thought we did. And we'll talk about the placebo effect next class. But if these groups are randomly assigned and they give different results, because they all were treated the same, we can actually establish cause and effect, as long as we do it to enough people that the conclusions couldn't have happened by random chance. So that's where we're going to stop for today, and we're going to talk about all these experiments and how they work, and we're going to play with some experiments and see how it goes in class. I will see you on Wednesday.